Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling an idea that really turns modern economics on its head. We're always told deflation is, well, just about the worst thing possible for an economy.
Absolutely. A disaster, right? Something central banks have to fight tooth and nail.
Yeah, exactly. But we're diving into a pretty radical counter-argument from the Austrian economist Jörg Guido Hülsmann, looking at his work, Deflation and Liberty.
And his take is, well, it's completely different. He argues this whole fear of falling prices, it's fundamentally misplaced. He sees deflation not as a catastrophe, but more like a moral cleanup crew.
It's quite something, isn't it? To just flip that narrative completely. We're taught, inflation might be annoying, but deflation, that's ruin.
And this fear isn't just academic. Hülsmann points to real examples. Think back to, November 2002. You had top officials, Greenspan, Bernanke from the Fed.
Right, and the Bank of England's chief economist, too.
Yeah, all basically saying very publicly that there was no limit to the amount of money they'd print to stop deflation.
Unlimited money. That really shows how deep the belief goes, doesn't it?
It defines the orthodoxy. If deflation looks like it's coming, the standard playbook is government borrows more, spends more, and the central bank just creates the money to make it happen.
It's presented as the only option, like to prevent total collapse.
But Hülsmann just rejects that outright. He says, look, for the average person, deflation isn't some mortal threat to their life or well-being.
He actually calls it a cleansing mechanism.
Which is a really profound claim. In his view, deflation only really destroys the companies, the industries that were sort of living on borrowed time anyway.
You mean the ones propped up by the current system?
Exactly. The ones that only survive because of the distortions caused by, constant low-level inflation inherent in fiat money.
So if you value free markets and liberty, Hülsmann's conclusion is pretty startling.
He says we should love deflation as much as our liberties, because it brings honesty back to prices, contracts, capital.
Okay, before we really get into the thick of it, we need to be clear about the terms. Because when Hülsmann talks inflation and deflation, it's not quite the same as the headline CPI number, right?
That's crucial, yeah. The news talks about rising prices as inflation. But Hülsmann and the Austrians generally are focused on the cause, the political act, really.
So for this discussion, how are we defining inflation?
We're defining it as Hülsmann does. The growth in the supply of base money, think central bank reserves, physical cash, and also financial claims, like bank deposits, that are supposed to be redeemable in that base money on demand.
It's about the quantity of money expanding, driven by policy.
Precisely. And deflation, then, is the opposite. It's a reduction in the quantity of that base money, or those immediately redeemable claims.
So it's about the money supply shrinking, which often leads to falling prices, sure, but the focus here is on the supply mechanism itself, the thing the state controls.
Exactly. And that distinction is key. It lets Hülsmann argue that inflation is fundamentally a policy choice, whereas deflation, that's often the market pushing back, trying to correct things.
Okay, got it. Let's dig into that policy choice then. Section 1, the inflationary disease, the engine of Leviathan. Hülsmann paints inflation as, well, basically essential fuel for the massive growth of the modern state.
Yeah, he looks at the 20th century, the welfare state, the warfare state both grew way faster than the actual economies in the West.
And he argues that kind of expansion, this Leviathan growth, wouldn't have been possible with just, straightforward taxes.
Politically impossible, probably. Imagine the tax hikes needed. People would have pushed back hard. So instead, governments relied on inflation expanding the money supply.
And the link to public debt is key here.
Absolutely. Look at U.S. public debt. Hülsmann points this out after Nixon closed the gold window in the early 70s.
Right, severing that last link between the dollar and gold.
Before that, U.S. debt was under $1 trillion. By late 2002, it was, $6.2 trillion? And it's just skyrocketed since.
Why the explosion, then?
Because breaking the link to commodity money removed the market discipline. It replaced it with political discretion. The government controls the Fed,
which has the monopoly on making dollars.
And that monopoly gives the government something unique. Guaranteed solvency, at least in nominal dollar terms. If push comes to shove, they can just print the dollars needed to pay the debt.
No other borrower has that kind of guarantee.
None. So government debt isn't really backed by future production or assets in the same way private debt is. It's backed by the printing press. And that ability lets the government grow far beyond what's fiscally sustainable through normal means.
This unchecked funding ability. This is why Hülsmann uses such strong language, calling inflation the technical basis for the totalitarian menace. That sounds extreme.
It does, but his argument is about the concentration of power. When you take money out of the market's control, like a gold standard, and put it under political control, the central bank and the state gains power over the fundamental measuring stick of the economy.
The unit of account itself.
Right. It lets the state fund things, wars, bureaucracies, welfare programs, without the explicit, painful democratic process of raising taxes. It's funding through stealth.
And when the state can fund itself without that direct check?
The potential for unchecked growth and control becomes, well, much, much greater.
Okay, but what about the standard justification? The argument we always hear that, a little bit of inflation is actually good, that it stimulates things, keeps unemployment down.
Ah, yes, the supposed short-run benefits. This is the core Keynesian idea, and Hülsmann traces it back to some, let's say, questionable assumptions, even in classical economics.
Like David Hume thinking inflation could boost production temporarily.
Exactly. An error, Hülsmann says, that was seized upon and amplified by modern statists like Keynes and Irving Fisher. They argued the printing press could, work magic in the short term, reduce unemployment, boost growth.
But Hülsmann says, hold on, look closer. There are no systematic short-run benefits. It's just shuffling things around.
It's redistribution, a zero-sum game. Think about it. The central bank creates new money. Who gets it first?
Usually big banks, government contractors, maybe?
Right. And they get to spend it before prices have adjusted upwards. So they benefit hugely. They can bid up wages, buy resources.
Outcompeting others who haven't gotten the new money yet?
Precisely. But everyone else, other firms face higher costs, and anyone holding existing money finds its purchasing power dropping.
So wealth just gets shifted from some people to others. It's not actually created.
Not at all. Which brings us to that big claim about unemployment and sticky wages.
Right. Explain sticky wages for us. Why is that so central to the pro-inflation argument?
Okay, sticky wages is the idea that workers resist cuts to their nominal pay packet. Even if prices are falling in a recession, they'll fight to keep earning the same dollar amount.
So compared to the lower prices of goods, their labor becomes too expensive.
Exactly. Which leads to layoffs, unemployment, the mainstream fix, inflate the money supply.
How does that help?
It leaves the nominal wage the same. The number on the paycheck doesn't change, so the stickiness is respected. But because there's inflation, the real value, the purchasing power of that wage goes down.
So the employer is effectively paying less in real terms, even if the worker doesn't immediately see it?
Precisely. And Hülsmann just skewers this. He calls it a childish strategy. Why? Because it relies entirely on fooling the workers.
It only works if they don't realize their real wage is being cut by inflation.
Right. As soon as workers anticipate inflation, what do? They demand higher nominal wages to keep up. And then, according to Mises and Hülsmann, inflation has no positive effect on unemployment. It might even make things worse by just delaying the needed real adjustments.
And the long-term cost of playing this game, well, it's pretty stark. The dollar losing, 98% of its value since the Fed took over?
That 98% is just the headline number. Think about the deeper effects. Hülsmann argues paper money has fueled bigger and bigger financial crises, and it's totally changed how businesses are financed. A century ago, strong companies were mostly built on retained earnings, on equity, on savings, basically. Now, everything's dominated by debt, by financial intermediaries.
All floating on a sea of easy paper money.
Yeah. This addiction to debt, he says, is a direct result of the inflationary system. It's fundamentally unsound.
So if inflation is this engine driving state growth and economic distortion, Hülsmann needs to offer an alternative, right?
Which brings us to Section 2, the roots of liberty and sound money. He goes back to basics.
He really does. Back to thinkers like Aristotle, Hume, Smith. Their core insight, which seems almost too simple today, is that money isn't consumed, nor does it directly produce things.
It's a tool for exchange.
Right. And therefore, the quantity of money circulating is kind of irrelevant to a nation's actual wealth. Real wealth is about productive capacity, resources, goods, services.
So having 10 times the amount of dollars doesn't make us 10 times richer in real terms. We still have the same number of factories, farms, people. Any given quantity of sound money can do the job of facilitating exchange. What matters is the quality, the integrity of the money, not the sheer amount.
And in a truly free society, how would money be produced?
competitively. It would be constrained by the market by what people actually trust and are willing to use. And history suggests, he argues, that precious metals usually win out. Gold, silver.
Why them?
They have useful properties: durable, divisible, portable, intrinsically valuable, and crucially, their supply can't just be expanded massively overnight by political whim.
Which puts monetary power where?
In the hands of the citizens, essentially. They become sovereign in monetary affairs because their wealth is tied to something the state can't easily manipulate or create out of thin air.
Contrast that with paper money. Hülsmann's view is pretty blunt there.
He says paper money has never emerged from a free market. It's always fiat money by decree.
Imposed by the state.
Imposed by state power, backed by legal tender laws that force people to accept it. For Hülsmann, the very existence of fiat money signals a breakdown of free association, a coercive intervention by the state.
Let's unpack that violation of free association. Mining gold, minting it, trading it, those are voluntary acts, right?
Yes, benefiting all parties who choose to participate. But Hülsmann argues that the institutions enabling inflation, he points specifically to fractional reserve banking and fiat money itself, are inherently illiberal. They depend on violating property rights.
How does fractional reserve banking violate property rights in his view? This is a controversial point.
It is. The argument centers on the nature of a deposit. When you deposit money, you get a claim like a checking account balance, theoretically redeemable on demand. Fractional reserve means the bank only holds a fraction of that money. Hülsmann, following the Austrian tradition, argues that when banks issue more claims, loans, checkable deposits, they have actual base money reserves to back them and present these uncovered claims as fully backed titles. That's fraudulent.
They're essentially lending out money that depositors believe is safely stored and available on demand, creating money from a promise they can't simultaneously fulfill for everyone.
That's the core of the Austrian critique. It's seen as creating money substitutes, unbacked by actual money, violating the implicit contract with the original depositors. Fiat money then takes this basic mechanism and uses state power to remove even the market check of bank runs, forcing acceptance.
So fiat money can't survive competition.
He argues it couldn't. If people weren't forced by legal tender laws, they'd naturally gravitate towards sounder money.
Which makes inflation, in this view, much more than just an economic policy. It's a tool for what? Unjust enrichment.
Exactly. The redistribution effect we talked about. It systematically favors the creators of the fiat money, the central bank, and their close associates. The banking sector, the stock market, government allies, those who get the new money first.
Hülsmann calls it a large-scale ripoff, favoring the politically connected.
He does. And he connects it to social mobility, too.
How does inflation slow down people moving up the economic ladder?
Because it insulates the established players. In a sound money system, success comes from serving consumers well, from genuine production. In an inflationary system, success often comes from proximity to the money spigot, getting cheap loans, bailouts, government contracts funded by new money.
So the politically connected stay rich and powerful longer than they might otherwise.
Right. It creates and perpetuates what Hülsmann calls a false elite, whose position relies on state privilege and monetary manipulation, not necessarily on market merit. It acts as a brake on genuine competition and mobility.
Wow. Okay, so if inflation is the disease, the corruptor, Hülsmann presents deflation as the cure. Let's move to section 3. Deflation as moral correction, the revelation of truth. The standard view is deflation equal economic death. Hülsmann says,
no. He says deflation doesn't destroy real wealth. Think about it. If all prices fell by half overnight.
A dramatic deflation.
Yeah. Would that suddenly make our factories disappear, our roads crumble, our ability to grow food vanish?
No, the physical stuff is all still there.
Exactly. The tools, machines, infrastructure, knowledge, the real basis of wealth remains intact.
And businesses can still make profits, right? Because profit is about the spread between selling prices and costs. If both fall roughly in proportion, the potential for profitable production remains. What deflation does change radically is ownership. Okay. This is where the pain comes in, the debt deflation issue.
This is the heart of it. Firms and households that are heavily leveraged, lots of debt taken out when prices were higher.
Like mortgages, business loans.
They get crushed. Their income, their revenue falls with the general price level, but their debts, those are fixed in nominal terms. They still owe the same number of dollars, but those dollars are much harder to earn.
This is Irving Fisher's point. The more the debtors pay, the more they owe, because the real burden of the debt increases massively.
Precisely. And Fisher saw this potential spiral bankruptcies leading to less spending, leading to lower prices, leading to more bankruptcies, and concluded that government had to step in to stop it. He thought liquidation was self-defeating.
But Hülsmann disagrees with that conclusion.
He fundamentally disagrees. He says Fisher confused a change in who owns the assets with the destruction of those assets.
So when the over-indebted company goes bankrupt, the factory doesn't vanish into thin air.
No, someone else buys it. People who were prudent, people who held cash, who saved, who weren't heavily in debt. They can buy the assets, the factory, the real estate, at the new lower prices.
And they can run it profitably.
Yes, because their capital structure is sound. They bought it cheap, possibly with equity, not debt taken on at inflated prices. The productive capacity is transferred, not destroyed.
So the pain is very real for the debtors, but it's a transfer of ownership from the, let's say, imprudent or unlucky to the prudent and liquid.
Exactly. And this highlights a key difference Hülsmann stresses: transparency. Inflation is sneaky. It's a secret ripoff, creating anonymous winners and losers, perfect for exploitation by hidden elites.
Well, deflation.
Deflation is open. It's redistribution through bankruptcy, according to the law. The pain is visible, sure, but the process is out in the open. The market is visibly correcting past errors.
This open correction is the cleansing he talks about. Now, how do these inflationary booms actually end? He outlines 3 ways they can collapse, all involving deflation.
Right. The first is the classic liquidity crisis or bank run. This was more common before central banking became so dominant. Basically, people suddenly lose confidence in the fractional reserve banks.
They all want their base money back at once.
Exactly. But the bank only holds a fraction. So banks fail, the supply of money substitutes collapses, credit freezes, a sharp deflationary shock.
Okay, scenario 2, the Austrian business cycle.
This is maybe the most theoretically central one for Austrians. The central bank creates money, pushes interest rates down artificially low.
Lower than the market rate based on real savings.
Right. This fools businesses into starting long-term projects. Big factories, complex R&D that seem profitable at those fake low rates, but aren't actually supported by real savings. Resources get misallocated into these unsustainable ventures.
The boom phase?
Yes. But eventually, the credit expansion has to slow. Or reality bites. Businesses realize their projects are unprofitable, malinvestments are revealed, firms go bust, loans go bad.
And the resulting liquidation of these bad investments causes a contraction in credit and money supply deflation.
Precisely. The bust reveals the errors made during the artificial boom. And the third scenario is specific to our current system: fiat money collapse.
How does that lead to deflation? Isn't hyperinflation the usual end game for fiat?
Usually, yes, hyperinflation is the terminal stage. But Hülsmann notes that because legal tender laws force us to use the fiat currency, a sudden deflationary collapse like a bank run is less likely initially. Instead, inflation might accelerate and accelerate.
Until the money becomes practically worthless.
Right. At which point, people just abandon it. They turn to barter, or they start using alternative monies of foreign currencies, maybe even commodities again, unofficially. That flight from the official currency can represent a kind of collapse, a final rejection, even if preceded by hyperinflation. The key is the system breaks down.
Okay, let's push back a bit here. Hülsmann seems to almost welcome this painful correction, but what about the human cost? Mass bankruptcies, unemployment, people losing homes. Isn't that causing a depression? Isn't he just too dismissive of that suffering?
That's the standard, very powerful critique. And Hülsmann's response is really about pinpointing the source of the suffering. He'd argue the suffering isn't caused by the deflationary correction itself.
It's caused by the inflation that came before.
Exactly. The inflation created the unsustainable boom, the misallocated resources, the mountains of bad debt. The deflation is just the moment reality reasserts itself. It's the hangover after the party.
So trying to cure the deflation with more inflation
is like giving an alcoholic more booze to cure the shakes. It just postpones the inevitable crash and likely makes it far worse, potentially causing deeper social and political damage down the line. The pain comes from unwinding the prior mistakes.
So putting it all together, deflation isn't just an economic event for Hülsmann, it's a liberating force, politically and morally too.
That's the core of his argument. He sees it achieving several vital things for a free society. First, it obviously stops the inflationary process and damages the institutions that profit from it.
The central bank, parts of the financial sector.
Right. Second, By making debt finance incredibly risky during the correction, it reverses the bias against savings-based equity finance. It rewards thrift and punishes excessive leverage.
Which leads to more prudence.
Hopefully, yes. It forces financial decision-making back down to individuals and firms, making them more self-reliant, less dependent on bailouts or easy money.
And politically, it hits the false elites.
It undermines their economic base. Those whose wealth and power derive from privileged access to credit and state-controlled money lose that advantage. They're forced to either become genuinely productive, a true elite based on market value, or they lose their position.
And it limits the state itself.
By removing the easy funding mechanism of inflation, yes, it forces government spending back towards fiscal reality. This connection to political power is why, he notes, the 1931 Macmillan report in the UK called deflation primarily a political problem because it threatened the established order. It forced a circulation of the elites.
So Hülsmann's bottom line is pretty stark. If you want a free society, deflation isn't just acceptable, it's sometimes the only monetary policy that works towards that goal.
That's his radical conclusion. And he points to Japan in the 1990s as the cautionary tale of what happens when a society refuses that necessary cleanse.
Japan's lost decades. What happened there?
They had a massive asset bubble burst in the early 90s. A huge deflationary pressure built up. But the establishment, the ruling LDP, the big corporate conglomerates, the banks, they refused to allow the necessary bankruptcies and restructuring.
They chose to fight the deflation instead.
Vigorously.
Yeah.
Zero interest rates, massive government spending financed by the Bank of Japan creating money. Basically endless stimulus.
And the result?
Not recovery, but stagnation. What Hülsmann calls a zombie life for huge, inefficient, bankrupt companies kept afloat solely by political will and cheap money. The refusal to accept the short-term pain of deflationary correction turned an economic crisis into decades of malaise.
A warning for other economies facing similar choices today.
Absolutely. He sees it as the potential fate of the West if governments keep intervening to prevent these necessary market corrections.
Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive. Jörg Guido Hülsmann's core message is that this widespread fear of deflation, it's largely a myth, maybe even a deliberate distraction.
Yeah, the real enemy, in his view, is inflation, the policy that secretly funds the state, distorts the economy, and undermines honest dealing.
He calls the dangers of deflation chimerical, like phantoms, but the benefits.
The benefits restoring honesty, rewarding saving, clearing out the economic deadwood supported by political favor, those, he says, are very real.
And fundamentally, it comes down to who controls the money.
Does the state control it, or does the market, through free association and competition? Hülsmann argues forcefully that money production needs to be taken out of government hands.
Which echoes some very old ideas, doesn't it? Like the thinking behind the U.S. Constitution.
It really does. The American founders had lived through the disaster of the Continental currency, pure fiat inflation. They knew it was a political weapon.
Which is why the Constitution originally restricted states to only gold and silver coin as legal tender.
Exactly. They saw a direct link. Sound money, limited government, individual liberty, they are intertwined. Hülsmann is reviving that same fundamental principle for our time.
So the final thought to leave everyone with is this powerful contrast. Inflation acts like a mask, hiding political power grabs and economic distortions. Deflation, however painful, reveals the underlying economic truth.
And a free society, Hülsmann insists, simply cannot endure without honest money. When the money is sound, when it's outside easy political manipulation, liberty has a much stronger foundation.
It's the same reason the founders tried to anchor the currency, because ultimately the people, not the state, should hold the ultimate claim to value and control over their economic life.
Remove the power to inflate, and you significantly reduce the power to dominate. That's why Hülsmann sees deflation, paradoxically, as the monetary expression of liberty's return.
Well, that's about all the time we have. You've been listening to The Deep Dive from Wake Up and Smell the Freedom, where ideas percolate. Thanks for joining us as we continue to explore the ideas that shape liberty and continue to shape us today. Remember, the pursuit of liberty begins with understanding, and understanding begins with asking the right questions. Until next time.
Bye-bye.